Welcome to the Social Business Engine podcast, where today's thought leaders discuss how they're using the latest social media strategies and technologies in marketing, sales, customer service, and HR. Get ready to be inspired as our guests contribute to your digital transformation through their stories, knowledge, and insights into what works in today's digitally connected world. And now, here's Bernie Borges, your host of the Social Business Engine podcast.
Hey there, welcome to episode 181. I'm Bernie Borges, CMO of Vengreso and your host of the Social Business Engine podcast. Hey, thanks for listening. On this episode, I am really excited to bring you my conversation with Mike Volpe, Chief Marketing Officer at Cybereason. Now, one reason that I'm excited to bring you this episode is that I've had the privilege of knowing Mike for about 10 years now. And I consider Mike truly one of the brightest marketing minds out there. He combines sophisticated inbound content, SEO, video, podcast, and traditional marketing strategies, all bringing them all together to support the sales strategy at his current company, Cybereason, which you'll hear all about. It's a very cool company. Now, to give you a little bit more about Mike Volpe, he is, as I mentioned, the CMO at Cybereason. He's a very hands-on marketing executive, as you'll see. And he's also a member of the founding team, and he was CMO at HubSpot, where he drove their growth from 0 to 1,000 employees and more than 15,000 customers, as well as a successful IPO. Now, Mike is also an angel investor. He's an advisor or a board member at more than 25 companies that are primarily software startups in the Boston area, where he lives with his family. Now, as you'll hear on this episode, we discuss how marketing and sales work together, leveraging an integrated approach, an account-based marketing approach that even includes some offline marketing tactics that we don't hear a lot about these days in this digital marketing landscape that we live in. All right, now before we get to the episode with Mike, I want to let you know that this episode is sponsored by Lithium Technologies. In case you missed it, this is episode 181, but if you missed episodes 175 through 179, 5 episodes, they were co-hosted by Dale Hall, Senior Vice President of Marketing at Lithium Technologies. Now, that episode, we call it an up-close podcast series because it's a series of 5 episodes. The title of it is The 5 Most Influential Topics in B2B Marketing. Now, we're making all those 5 episodes available to you in one recording, so you can binge listen to all 5 of them together. Some marketing teams actually sit around and gather around in kind of a lunch and learn setting, and they actually treat these 5 episodes as a training experience. You'll also get the written version of the podcast episodes in the Social Business Journal Volume 10, which is a PDF, and it also has some bonus content in it. So to get both the 5 episodes and the Social Business Journal Volume 10, just go to socialbusinessengine.com, click on the Up Close Podcast button that is brought to you by Lithium Technologies, and you will get it. All right, so let's get to my conversation with Mike Volpe. Well, Mike, welcome to the Social Business Engine podcast.
Bernie, thanks for having me. I think this is going to be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Well, we were kind of chatting a little bit before we pressed the record button about how we have done a podcast before, a couple of times, I think, maybe, over the years, but perhaps the first time here on Social Business Engine. So why don't we begin with a brief introduction to Cybereason? It looks like a pretty cool company. What's Cybereason about?
Yeah, so we're a cybersecurity company. We have cybersecurity software. And fundamentally what we do is we sort of give companies a much greater advantage in fighting against all of today's modern threats because we have a behavioral artificial intelligence engine that looks for patterns of bad behavior. So rather than just comparing, malware and software to a database of things that are known to be bad, we actually look at what's actually being done by the malware, by all the different hacking techniques, and piece together the full story using behavioral analysis. So it's some pretty powerful stuff, and it was actually a spin out of essentially the Israeli intelligence cyber division. So there's a strong sort of military cyber background of the company as well.
Nice. That part I did not know about. Okay, cool. So how do you do marketing? You are the chief marketing officer at Cybereason. I have so many questions, Mike. I mean, you've got a target persona. Who's that target persona? Is it, Cyber Charlie or?
Yeah. So it's so we sell, and the funny thing is, so we sell bigger deals. So they're typically, 6-figure deals, sometimes 7-figure deals, sometimes decent size, into the 7 figures. And so it's really like multiple personas. The primary one is definitely the chief security officer, typically at, let's say, a Fortune 1000 company. But there's a CFO or a COO is often part of the process, sometimes even, some CEO or board level involvement. But then on the more technical side, there's usually a director of a SOC, which is a security operations center, and then even like security analysts that work within that SOC. So it's sort of like you need to really map out. It's much more of an account-based strategy, as people are talking about these days, and you really need to map out for each account, who the different personas are, and almost have a slightly different kind of marketing and sales game plan for each one.
Okay, well, I think we're getting into some territory that I'm kind of living in these days, Mike. We've both seen our careers evolve over the last 10 years. Believe it or not, it's been 10 years. And for me, I've really gotten kind of back to, I started my career in sales, software sales, way back in the 1930s. No, I'm kidding, but it was a while ago. It was a few decades ago, not quite that many. And then I got into marketing, right? So I did roughly 10 years sales, roughly 10 years marketing before I started my own agency. And so these days at Vengreso, as CMO at Vengreso, one of the things that I'm waving the flag about is marketing and sales alignment. And of course, that is not a new topic, right? But it seems like we're seeing it actually become a reality in some companies. And I'm going to speculate here, Mike, and you can prove me wrong. I don't think you will, though, that you're doing that right there through an account-based strategy approach. Want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, specifically around the sales and marketing alignment, I think one of the things I found when I joined here a year ago was that the relationship between sales and marketing was really kind of fundamentally broken. You had, some people in sales were almost unable to talk to a lot of the people in marketing. They just felt like marketing was doing all the wrong things. Marketing felt like they were getting no support from sales, and all the leads they were generating weren't being followed up by sales. They felt like their efforts were sort of being wasted. And so we've come in and we've sort of done a lot with our teams. We have a new head of sales that started a couple months after I did, and the two of us sort of built things from the ground up to have good, strong sales and marketing alignment. In fact, it goes all the way to the top. So he and I, like our chief revenue officer and myself, don't have like one-on-one meetings with our CEO. We actually have like a sales and marketing meeting, like a go-to-market meeting with our CEO where both of us are in the room. So I think that sort of gives us, it's like, I mean, to me, it's really one process. And, obviously if there's personnel related things or things like that, I'm not going to say the CEO never meets with either of us one-on-one, but
sure.
the primary mode of interaction is around, well, here's my go-to-market team. Where are the problems in the go-to-market? What do we need to work on? Whether it's, toward the front new pipeline generation, or whether it's closing down deals and more sales enablement and things like that, or what's the productivity model look like, or whatever. So I think it's, it goes all the way to the top, but there's almost all the meetings between sales and marketing are really joint meetings. So there's a pipeline review meeting where there's multiple people from marketing in there that happens each week. There's, all the goal setting for what the new pipeline goals, what the new lead generation or new opportunity generation goals need to be are set jointly between sales and marketing. So it's become really a very tight process, and it's really sort of two sides of the same coin now, which I think, kind of works really well. And you're right, that can extend all the way up to sort of being more account-based and really having like an account-based strategy.
Okay, cool. So, back in the early days of inbound marketing, when it really was the marketing department doing all of the marketing and marketing alignment was more of a theory than a reality, how are you doing marketing now in a way that does align with sales, but still doing what I'll call, if I can even call it, traditional inbound marketing?
Yeah, it's like, yeah. So we do, the interesting thing is with a much larger deal size, you can do a lot more of the traditional stuff and the math still works. So, with a 6-figure deal, you can spend hundreds of dollars just to get a meeting with someone if it's the right person. And so we're doing a really interesting combination of, certainly a lot of inbound, a lot of content, SEO, social, things like that, videos. We have a podcast that's performed really well that goes into like the history of hacking and cybersecurity called The Malicious Life. And so we're doing a lot of the more traditional sort of, or newer kind of inbound things. But then we're doing some outbound. We found that actually direct mail, when targeted at the right accounts with the right sales follow-up in a really timely manner, can work really well. We do a lot of events, so we do over 100, trade shows and events per year. 2 or 3 of those are really big ones, where maybe an event that has 20 or 40,000 people. A lot of them are smaller, a couple hundred people, more of like a local or a regional event. But we do a lot of events. An emerging number of our own events, like we have our own conference with Steve Wozniak keynoting that's happening October 3rd and 4th, where we'll have a couple hundred people there for that. But then we also do, lots of industry events as well. So it's really kind of much more of kind of a balanced approach between all the different techniques here. And certainly we see that the inbound leads tend to be the hottest ones, and the people that come in that are requesting a demo or reaching out to our sales team or things like that are the best ones. Mm-hmm. But again, for a bigger deal, you may get inbound, like we were saying earlier, the director of the SOC, the Security Operations Center, but maybe you need to then go outbound to get to the chief security officer, right? Because there's going to be, again, 6+ personas per account. Maybe you get a couple of them for inbound, and that kind of activates the account in your model, but then you need to go outbound to get the other ones involved. Things like that. So it really is, it's become sort of this very messy mix of a lot of different things is where I feel like we're kind of headed.
Okay. So what it sounds like to me then is that there is this mix going on, like you say. So it sounds like marketing really needs to understand sales. I actually like to call it marketing needs to be sales, but then also sales also needs to understand the role of marketing. So likewise, the inverse is true. Sales needs to be marketing. And how much of that do you see going on where there's this deep level sort of DNA understanding where sales and marketing could almost, maybe not quite, but almost like switch roles, not in a literal sense, but like the DNA connection is so strong. Are you there, or do you think you're on your way there?
I think we'd like to get there. I think if we can at least, we're definitely not there yet. I think that there's a lot of skill involved in the sales process and a lot of skill involved in the marketing process that we haven't yet been able to transfer between the teams. But I do think that what we've been able to sort of instill is an understanding of what types of marketing things can help with what types of sales problems and what types of revenue generation problems. And an understanding from marketing of when sales is saying that, here are the key issues. And, maybe one of the issues is we have a strong pipeline for Q4, but we're very concerned about getting deeper into those accounts so we can have a higher success rate of closing them in Q4. Then you need to take that sort of feedback from sales and then apply your marketing brain to it from what you understand about sales and say, okay, well, that means that, I need to figure out ways to help the sales team have productive conversations with other personas in the account that they're not interacting with right now. How could I possibly do that? What are the things that we can do to get, our brand in front of a chief security officer or a CIO or someone else? And how can we do that among the 20, 50, 100 accounts that we're targeting for Q4 that are currently in the pipeline? So I think that you're absolutely right. Like the deeper you can go with that sort of mutual understanding of each other's roles is better. I think that most companies should at least shoot for the ability to have like a basic understanding of how to diagnose the problems from each side, and then from your side understand like what are the things you can do to try to solve those problems.
Okay, cool. You mentioned that you've got a podcast. You said it's called The Malicious Life.
Yeah,
is that right?
That's right.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, so as you know, I'm a huge fan of podcasts, and I know you are as well because you've done lots of podcasting, and I've done some as well.
You've done lots,
and
as well.
I've done, I think you've done more. I mean, this is episode 181 or something, so that's a lot, man. But I think here's the thing about podcasting is it's another great format. It's another way that, some people prefer audio, some prefer video, some prefer written content. It's just another way to get in front of people. What we try to do with our show is within our particular industry, there were a lot of like weekly news shows that were sort of breaking down the like new cybersecurity news each week. And so we sort of took a different approach. It was much more of sort of a Radio Lab or a This American Life kind of approach where we sort of do a lot of storytelling. And so the podcast is actually broken out into seasons. The first season is the history of basically computer viruses and malware. And it starts off with like the actual original, the stories behind the first computer virus, how it got its name, what were the techniques that it used, how it would spread, and things like that. And then it sort of follows that, because a lot of the computer virus stuff started as just sort of like literally programmers trying to show off their skill and demonstrate that some things were possible, and it wasn't all meant to have any nefarious intent. It would just sort of infect your machine and maybe show a picture or something like that, but it wouldn't actually do any damage. And following that all the way through to today, where you've got some very damaging ransomware attacks. The last episodes for season 1 of the show are about Stuxnet, which is basically a virus that the American and Israeli militaries used to help disrupt the Iranian nuclear enrichment program. So there's some really crazy stuff that you can do now with code, and it sort of follows the whole history of those things. And the idea is to like make it a storytelling podcast that helps gets our brand in front of people, but in a very sort of educational and also entertaining way.
Yeah, well, I applaud you for being a B2B brand, and of course, it's not your first B2B rodeo by any stretch, right? That's taking an approach using a podcast on a topic like cybersecurity. That's awesome. Let's talk about your video content, because we were also talking before we press record that I was watching some of your videos and I felt like I was watching a movie. Both in terms of the quality of the production, but also like the storyline really kind of grabbed me in like a movie does.
Yeah. Well, there's movies about hacking now, right? So,
right.
So in some ways, the world that we're in kind of lends itself to that. Yeah. I think, I mentioned earlier, the company has its roots in Israel. We're an American company, but we have a lot of our development is there, and the founders are originally Israeli. And we have probably, 160 people in the U.S. and probably 100 or so in Tel Aviv doing research and development. But because of that, it's interesting. We found that you can get some high quality work for less money from a lot of agencies in Israel. And so we found a couple good production houses that were able to make those videos for us at rates that I feel like are far cheaper than I would have paid here in the U.S. So it makes the budget go a little bit further. So a lot of that stuff was outsourced. We definitely don't have that capability at that level in house. We have hired a video person recently who's great, but that stuff you're talking about are sort of this heavy animation, right? Strong voiceover work. One of them, there's some professional acting, from a couple of the different folks within the video. So yeah, it's definitely a higher production quality than stuff I've dealt with before, but a lot of that was made possible by working with somebody from abroad.
Now, do you know, because I know that you've always been a very analytical marketing executive, Mike, so do you know to what extent these amazing videos have an impact on your sales process, your sales cycle, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I'll tell you the interesting thing about enterprise and big deals is it's actually much harder to tie things back and understand. I think, at HubSpot and even when I was at SolidWorks before then, when our deal size was much smaller, there were fewer like marketing touch points that were happening and the sales process was just much less complex. And so you can much more easily tie back, oh, this person watched this video on the site and then they signed up for this thing and then they went into a sales process and then they turned into a customer. That was a much easier process. Now I'm in a situation where not only do a lot of my buyers use a lot of like ad blocking and like privacy technologies in terms of the web browsing, but I got a lot of it that's happening offline at events and with a field sales team, and I've got 6+ personas per account. It's just much, much harder to tie all that stuff back. And I've got a smaller number of deals that are happening at much larger numbers. Like for the same revenue number, I've probably got, 10 or 20 times smaller deals, fewer deals. And so it's actually really, really hard to tie individual things back. So it's in some ways you almost need to trust your gut a little bit more and just have a sense of, what I'm hearing from people that bought is, these things were important to them, or what I'm hearing from my sales team is these things tend to be important. It's much harder to actually track the real data back and get hyper analytical about it. So in some ways it's kind of been, I don't know if it's good or bad, but a little bit of a return to sort of gut feel on a few things.
So it sounds like, getting back to your relationship with the chief revenue officer, it sounds like, those conversations are happening frequently enough to, you say, trust your gut, but also get feedback on what's actually happening on a daily, weekly, monthly basis on the deals.
Yeah, it's, again, we sell primarily through field reps, outside reps. And so, if you have an inside team, it's easy to walk by and sit down next to them and listen to some of their calls and see what's actually happening in the real world. That's much harder to do if they're all remote and the meetings are taking place in person and there's nothing that you can, dial into or observe that way. So it's definitely much harder. I think the other thing that's harder too is, at HubSpot as a marketer, I was marketing to marketers. And so I could have a much more productive conversation with customers and understand from them much more easily, like what their challenges were, what they liked and didn't like about the product and things like that. Now it's sort of been this extra level of marketing challenge that I need to be able to put myself into the head of someone else who is not me. In fact, an example of that is I had a friend who worked at Gillette doing marketing as a brand manager, and he got switched to work on the Venus razor line. So it's a women's razor line. And I said, wow, like that's got to be interesting to go from, I think he had been on like men's shaving cream or something like that, a product that like he would use every day. And he's like, it's a really interesting marketing challenge because, I'm not a woman, like I shave, but I use, it's a totally different product process and a different product and you're using it in different ways. And he had to get in the head of a buyer that was, much harder for him to get in the head of. And he said it was for the first time he felt like he was sort of doing real marketing. Like he wasn't marketing to himself. He had to get the head of a different buyer. And in many ways, I sort of feel the same way here. It's been kind of more work to get into the head of kind of a different buyer. But it's a really interesting marketing challenge to have to do that.
Okay, cool. So, Mike, one last question, and then I'm going to segue to my summary here. But, you in the company you're working at, Cybereason is very, very cutting edge in terms of the cybersecurity work that you do. So I'm not going to ask you about the product because, first of all, it's probably, not the right place for us to discuss that. But from a marketing standpoint, what's next? What do you see happening over the next, 6, 12, 18, 24 months at Cybereason?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that what I'm discovering is that from a content perspective, within our market, there's a lot of sort of blog and social and short form content. And I think that's pushing us to do things that are a little different and stand out and sort of do more kind of long form content. So we're thinking a lot more about books, full, like not like an ebook, like a real book, both printed version and digital, but like much longer, more in-depth content, even going from things like lots of 2-minute videos to more like 10, 20-minute videos. I mentioned the podcast is done much more like it's a show with seasons. Right. The episodes are much longer. Some of them are like an hour. So a lot of those things where it's just like a lot more longer form content. I think that's one really interesting area that I think people don't talk about quite as much right now, but we're certainly seeing that that's an area where we feel like we can have some differentiation, and it changes how you approach content. Writing a 300-word blog post versus writing a much longer book.
Oh, absolutely. Of course, it's a big investment, but to your point, great differentiation. That's amazing. I'm going to watch for that. So keep me posted on that. Cool. Well, Mike, what I want to do now is segue to the part of the podcast episode where I attempt to do a recap. And so I've been taking some notes here. So I'm going to recap for my listener who is often mobile. And then I'm going to ask you to either elaborate on anything or correct me on anything. Or if I jog your memory on a point, I'll ask you to fill that in. And then we'll bring this episode to a wrap.
I love it.
So we began our conversation with your brief introduction to your company, where you are Chief Marketing Officer, Cybereason. It's a cybersecurity software company where you provide a greater advantage for companies to fight against the modern threats. And the product tracks patterns of bad behavior using AI, and the company's spun out of these Israeli military intelligence, so really qualified background. And we kind of talked about how, you segued from your days at HubSpot and doing inbound marketing, and how, now you're doing bigger deals, 6 and some 7-figure deals, and you're marketing to multiple personas, typically in enterprise companies, chief security officer, director of SOC, security analysts, and they're different types of personas than the marketing persona that you marketed to in years past. And it's a little bit more of an account-based strategy where you map out a game plan. And that also really requires that you have a strong relationship, which it sounds like you do, with the chief revenue officer. And you pointed out that you have meetings with the CEO. You and the CRO are having meetings with the CEO talking about marketing and sales things that need to happen, which is often awesome. It's things like pipeline review and goal setting and lead generation goals, and of course, marketing strategies and tactics. And you mentioned, Mike, that on the tactics side, you've got multiple touch points that are required in the enterprise. So it's a little harder to tie directly attribution to specific deals. You're doing so many different things, including events. You even mentioned direct mail. You're marketing to 6+ personas. So you've got a mix of activities, including content, SEO, video. We talked about the high quality animation, voiceover, professional acting video that really tells the story really well. We talked about your podcast, The Malicious Life. I've got to go give that a listen, how it takes a seasonal approach. And I think you mentioned that you're still in season 1, or did I misunderstand that?
Yeah, we're just finishing season 1. Season 2
Okay.
should be coming out in a few weeks or a month or so, yes.
Okay. So in season 1 has been about the history of hacking and kind of an American life approach. And the podcast in general is just a great way to provide a different content medium to get in front of your target audience. And then we just talked about how, the skills that are needed in marketing and sales are skills that you have, but, you're still working on the transference of them among the two groups. But it sounds to me like you're probably not giving yourself as much credit as you deserve, because it sounds like a lot of this is already in play. And then we talked about what's next, and you said that really what's next you think is long-form content, as in real long-form content like books, printed, digital, as well as longer videos that are a little bit more movie style, and how it really delivers some differentiation for the Cybereason, or will deliver some key differentiation for the Cybereason brand. So that's my summary. Is there anything that you would like to elaborate on?
No, Bernie, you were clearly paying very close attention. I thought that was great.
All right, cool. Well, Mike, where would you like to send my listener to connect with you online and learn more about Cybereason?
Yeah, sure. I feel like probably for me, Twitter is the best place. So I'm Volpe, MVOLPE on Twitter. And then Cybereason is just cybereason.com. It's with one R.
Fantastic. Well, Mike, my listener knows that I will link that up in the show notes, so it's real easy for them to find both of those. So, Mike, thank you so much for joining me here on this episode of the Social Business Engine podcast.
Thanks for having me, Bernie. It was fun.
Hey, I hope that you enjoyed my conversation with Mike Volpe as much as I did. Mike is Chief Marketing Officer at Cybereason, and this has been episode 181, titled Marketing Cybersecurity Software Through Account-Based Marketing. Now, this episode is sponsored by my friends at Lithium Technologies. If you missed it, we did a 5-episode up-close podcast series, episodes 175 through 179. It was co-hosted by Dale Hall, Senior Vice President of Marketing at Lithium. And that up-close series is titled The 5 Most Influential Topics in B2B Marketing. You can get all 5 episodes in one recording, so you can binge listen to them or sit around with your marketing team in a training experience. You'll also get the written version in Social Business Journal Volume 10, which also has bonus content in it. So to get both the 5-episode series and Social Business Journal Volume 10, just go to socialbusinessengine.com. It's all one word. And click on the Up Close Podcast button. It's brought to you by Lithium Technologies. You can't miss it. And hey, before we sign off here on this episode, I want to remind you that if you are not subscribed to get our weekly updates, first of all, why aren't you? And hey, secondly, do it so you don't miss future podcast episodes. It's real easy. You can do that at either socialbusinessengine.com or at the mothership at Vengreso.com. Either one will make that happen. One more thing, I always like to remind you that if we are not connected on either LinkedIn or Instagram, Twitter, that's pretty much where I hang out on social. Either send me a personalized invitation on LinkedIn or just follow me on Twitter and Instagram. I am at Bernie Borges, pretty much all over there. And the podcast is at SB Engine on both Twitter and Instagram, and we're plain old Social Business Engine on Facebook. All right, well, that is a wrap for episode 181. I want to thank my guest once again, Mike Volpe, Chief Marketing Officer at Cybereason. This is Bernie Borges, CMO of Vengreso, signing off and wishing you continued success on your social business journey.
Thank you for listening to the Social Business Engine podcast. Be sure to tune in again next week to reconnect with Bernie Borges for more insights, inspiration, and practical advice on social business. Visit socialbusinessengine.com to catch even more content on social strategy that will rock your business and your career.